I'm Joe Terra, and I'm going to be up here for the next hour. And so by default, I guess I'm the tech guy, right? Because I had the audacity to use PowerPoints, right? About 23 years ago, Marlene and I were sitting in our little apartment in Spain, and we were talking about all of the studies that we had done, which were involving health and environmental work and the use of animal foods. Right? And we thought, well, we have to start a nonprofit. And so it was a long time in gestation, this project. And particularly when we moved to England and tried to get it through the Charities Commission, because there were certain words that we used in our application that they didn't like. One of them was social justice. I can't tell you the number of times that we spent, and Gary was actually on the phone with us one time, talking to them, trying to unravel their Baroque understanding of what does food have to do with social justice, right? And finally we got through though, right? And we're happy to say. And the issue that we were looking at was food is a very interesting topic, but not always for the reason that people think it is. Right? It's a very interesting topic because it's central to so many things that happen within our society. It has to do with the way that we relate to animals. It has to do with the way we relate to nature. It has to do with the way we relate to each other. And it very much has to do with the way we relate to our own health. Right? And Marlene's going to be talking more about that aspect of it a little later over lunch. Right? You had that over lunch, right? In between courses, right? So one of the things that I think we forget is that we are actually a product of our environment. The environment comes first, right? We're a product of it, and it's so unique that we're here. I mean, if the planet Earth was just a little bit closer to the sun or a little bit further away, we couldn't exist. It's a very narrow window. If the core, the molten core of the planet wasn't exactly the right mineral content that it is now, we couldn't exist. Right? There's all these coincidences that are there that mean that our existence is such a tiny speck of possibility, right? And here we are, here we are in the middle of this. And we don't appreciate that. It's not taught to us because the interesting thing, one of the interesting things to me is that scientifically, nobody understands that first part. The first part, right up to how did life begin? Probably the most massive question that you could ask. There's no scientific background to that. Nobody understands that. So we just go marching off into the future, right? Well, I'll just go do this and I'll just go do that, right? And we don't even know, we don't have any sense of where we came from or what the importance of that is. And it's so fundamentally important. Because when we look historically, indigenous people all over the world had a greater sense of that than we do. We call ourselves civilized and we don't understand where we are in the world. We don't understand the relationship that we have to the world that we live in, or the nature that produces the possibility of us, because it's only a possibility. This is just a little picture of how important we are in terms of life on planet Earth, right? And I don't know if you can, yeah, you can, because it's good. If you take this little teeny box down here in the corner of this first one on the left, on the slide on the left, that little teeny box is up here, right? And so if we notice where we are, I mean, the fish take up a big piece of that puzzle as life on Earth, and insects take up a big part of that puzzle, and livestock takes up a fairly good sized puzzle, and then there's human beings over there, tiny little people, right? We're so very, very small, and yet we have the delusion that we are dominant. We are dominant, right? We get to make the decisions. And we've been making decisions, right? And we make lots of decisions, and Even in the next years or so, we're going to even make more decisions, which are really huge decisions, which are going to dictate how life goes for the next hundreds and hundreds of years. Right? And some people would say, well, if we make hundreds and hundreds of years, we'll be doing a good job. Right? So where do we come from? We come from this whole process out of the abiotic world, which is the non-life world. We come out of this whole process through this magical progression. And that magical progression, I'm going to say, and I'm willing to discuss this with somebody, that ends up with the food that we eat. And the way that it ends up with the food that we eat is that every life form on the planet is dependent on plants. Every life form on the planet is dependent on plants. We can't go and stand out in the sun and eat dirt and photosynthesize and make proteins and carbohydrates and fats and all the other things that we need in order to exist. We can't do that. Only plants can do that. So in order to have animal life, you have to first have plant life. And it's the respect that we give to plant life and the way that we nurture plant life on the planet that is fundamental, not only to our existence, but also to our health. Right? And so that ends up in our gut biome. And the gut biome, this has become very popular lately. Right? People 5,000 years ago knew all about the gut biome. They talked about it very clearly. Right? Everything that happens in the gut biome affects everything about the way that we think, the way that our mind works, and about the way that our body works. And that's where the interface, the most intimate interface we have with the natural world, is in the gut lining. This is where the external environment becomes us. So if you look at the villi in the intestinal tract, those little roots that go down, right, we are constantly gardening. We're constantly eating food, digesting food, which is then absorbed into our intestinal tract and becomes us. And whatever we put in there is feeding all the microorganisms that live in the gut, and that's dictating our health. Right? And this is not weird science anymore. This is, everybody knows this. Everybody that cares to look it up knows this, right? So you can change that gut biome, all of those microorganisms, by eating one meal. If you eat a McDonald's hamburger, or even better yet, a double cheeseburger, right? If you eat a double cheeseburger, you have completely different colonies of microorganisms that start to exist in your gut. If you eat beans and grains and nuts and fruits and different microorganisms show up magically. Nobody really understands that either, because nobody knows where those microorganisms were before that happened. Right? All of a sudden, just bing, they're magically there. Right? My God, how did that happen? Well, we have to go back to the drawing board and figure that one out. Right? So that relationship that we have with what goes on in our gut is a primary issue. And it's a primary issue for adaptation, because this is the way our ancestors, no matter where we came from, our ancestors had to adapt to a specific environment. Sometimes that environment was a very humid environment. Sometimes it was a very dry environment. It might have been a desert. It might have been a forest. We had to adapt to that. But what we're doing now is something that's quite interesting, and that is we're attempting to adapt to an environment that we built. This never happened before. I mean, bees make beehives and they adapted, but that's an adaptation from the outside, right? But no other creature has ever said, you know what? I don't like that mountain. I'm going to cut the top of it off, and I'm going to put a building up there, right? A massive building, and then I'm going to live in it, right? Well, that's okay if you live on top of the building, right? If you live in the building. But we're adapting and adapting and adapting, and we're making more and more of an environment, and we're trying to adapt to that. And we are adapting to it. And that's scary, because the environment that's being built is not an environment that is healthy. It is a sick environment, and we're becoming sick creatures by living in it and trying to adapt to it. The amount of stress that people have in their lives, the amount of illness, Non-communicable diseases, which are self-caused diseases, are the ones that kill us. What? Why? Well, because we're trying to adapt to this built environment. And so we're not aware of this process, and yet we're going full steam ahead in creating it. And we make it worse and worse and worse, I'm afraid, right? This is a cheery morning, isn't it? but that's the process that's going on. And so we keep doing this, and the problem, we do some work in schools, and what we noticed is, unfortunately, that the students are changing. The way that young people, we're talking 13-year-olds were the ones that we last worked with, this group of 13-year-olds, and they have a different way of responding in the world when we think of the way that we might have responded to the world when we were that age, right? Because they're used to learning everything on screens. They're not used to relating. They don't understand food. It's interesting, when you have a class of like 20 students, which ones actually you can tell they actually have real food at home because they know what food is, right? Mm-hmm. And there's other kids that don't have any idea what food is at all. I did many years ago, I did an exhibit in a children's museum in Boston, Massachusetts. And we had a big glass case of plants growing, so students could see the roots of the systems of the plants, and they could see the tops of the plants. And I had a kid look at me and said, "That's not where my food comes from." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "My food doesn't come from dirt. Doesn't come from dirt." And it was hard to argue with him about that, because probably most of the food that he ate didn't really come from that natural organic soil that had bugs in it, and worms in it and all of that, right? It was completely unrelated for that. The children in the UK right now, more than any other country in Europe, consume ultra-processed food. 50% of the food that children eat now in the United Kingdom is ultra-processed food. So that's what the parents commonly call junk food. It's interesting because junk food has been something that's more popular for people to feed to their children than real food, right? Oh, we'll let the children go out and have some junk. Yeah. Let them go eat some junk, right? We're taking them to McDonald's as a treat. As a treat. Right? We'll deal with the heart disease later. So what are we looking for? What we have to start looking at is what we really need. And apologies to Abraham Maslow, but it's the bottom of that pyramid is what's so important. The pyramid is based on the fundamentals of life. We need to have clean air. We have to need clean water. We have to have good food, healthy food. Those are fundamental. Everything else is built on that. When you go to places in the world, or when you see places in the world where people don't have that, their interest in anything else just disappears. When you're starving, you don't care about anything except getting some food. I want to start with soil. This quote by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president of the United States in the 1930s. And it is very, very important, a little bit of background on this quote, because he had just experienced, in the United States had just experienced what was called the Dust Bowl. And the Dust Bowl was a result of bad farming and bad planning. And it meant that the topsoil of a huge swath of America, the most productive agricultural land, just rose up out of the earth, right? And blew out into the ocean, right? It blew thousands of miles away to New York. They had in New York City, there was dust from Texas, right? If you have any idea of the geography there, I mean, that's Dust Bowl dust in New York City, right? The New Yorkers didn't like it, right? Gary's people were very upset. Right? They said, keep that dust to yourself, right? But this is something that was noticed there because it became a problem that was contributing to the Great Depression. Because all of a sudden you had all this land, which when the first settlers came to America and stole the land, they looked at the land and said, wow, this is incredible land. Look how look how fruitful it is. This soil is fantastic. And then they spent about 100 years ruining it, right? You know, and plowing it shallow and overcropping it, and everything blew off. And that's a situation that we see around the world right now. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's a very important issue in itself. If you don't have good soil, you can't grow good plants. If you don't grow good plants, you can't have good health, right? It's a very simple relationship. And this is, again, only 29% of the land, or 25% of the earth is covered by land. The rest is ocean. That's why they call it a blue planet. Because when you look at planet Earth from outer space, you see almost all ocean. Right? Then out of that land, 71% of it is habitable land, and 46% of that is agricultural land. So you're talking about smaller and smaller areas that can be actually farmed for food. Right? But then if you look down at the bottom here, this is where it gets interesting. The agricultural land, 80% of that land is used for creating food for animals. 80% of the land. And only 16% crops for humans. Now, what's going on here? I mean, we already talked, Gary quite eloquently in his own way, talked about the moral responsibility we have to the animals, and that's foundational, right? But, and you were saying earlier, somebody up here was saying earlier about self-interest. Right? If you don't have self-interest, but we should be interested in this, right? We're using up all the resource that we can grow for food, we're using it to feed the animals. But out of that land that we feed to animals, we don't get any nutritional hit from it. We only get 17% of the calories of the world come from all of that animal food. That's the energy of the food, the caloric energy, a very tiny amount of the energy. 83% comes from that small amount of plant food. Protein. This is the big issue, right? Everybody talks about we've got protein shortage. A couple of years ago, in the big conference that all the wealthy people go to in Switzerland and in Davos, one of the topics was they were talking about the protein shortage. We don't have a protein shortage. We have a human being shortage, right? We don't have a protein shortage. The conclusions that they came up to were right out of science fiction. And science fiction is really big right now. You know, I don't know if you noticed, but some of the people that surround the Orange Man in the White House, right? Some of the people that surround him are imbued in science fiction. They want to, like Elon Musk wants to go into Mars, right? He ruins the world, but he wants to go to Mars, right? Jeff Bezos wants to go into space, right? Build a colony in space, right? These are science fiction. These are people that grew up on science fiction. I guarantee you. They watched way too many. They watched Blade Runner too many times, right? They got it imbued in their head how they want the world to be, and it's a science fiction world, right? And so, you know, we have this, and they talked about the problem with protein was going to be solved by crickets. Salish is laughing because he probably heard this one. They thought the solution to the protein problem is we can't keep growing these cows, right? But crickets, we could make huge buildings and fill them full of crickets, right? Can you imagine, like floor after floor after floor of little crickets in there? And then you just process the crickets down, grind them up, cricket burger, right? You know, and that's going to solve the problem. Speaking of science fiction, there was an old science fiction movie called Soylent Green. Some of you that are more of my generation might remember it. Charlton Heston discovered that people were being fed by ground up people, right? Fits in nicely, wedges in with Gary's lecture this morning, right? They were really doing it. So what happens to the soil around us now? Because of all of that land that's being used for cattle, one of the things that's happening is we're trying to promote more growth out of that land. We're trying to get more land, so we cut down forest, And then we want to increase the productivity of the land in terms of just creating stuff, food stuff. So soybeans, wheat, barley, corn, all of those crops, we're trying to push them up. And so one of the ways you do that is you use either genetically modified food, and you need lots and lots of pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers to grow that food so that you can grow it really fast. This was what was introduced in the 1960s with what was called the Green Revolution, which was supposed to revolutionizing farmers. And what it did was it drove small farmers out of business, and big industry could come in and run all the farms because nobody else could afford the fertilizers and all the rest of it. But because you use so much of that, it runs off. And so what you have is you have all of these chemicals that are being used to increase productivity, all are going into the river and going out to the ocean. And what that produces is you have 500 areas of the ocean of the world right now, which are called prosaically dead zones. And a dead zone means there's no oxygen in the water for any life form to live. And so it literally is a dead zone. It's just a scum pond, right? And these scum ponds are huge, absolutely huge. The one at the mouth of the Mississippi River, you can imagine, right? Which had to grow on the soil from the Dust Bowl, right? Has been really growing in there for centuries, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Nothing grows in there. Nothing grows there. You look at the mouth of the Congo River in Africa, mammoth growth of the dead zone. So we kill the oceans in the process. What a wonderful process that is, right? All the chemicals, the nitrates, the erosion, loss of microorganism, and along the way, you reduce the diversity of insects because you're using all these pesticides. Well, my God, if insects disappear, we're really gone. I mean, we're gone quick. You know, people talk about bees, but the number of insects that are absolutely essential for creating a healthy soil and creating a healthy environment above the ground is just phenomenal. You take them away, everything falls apart, right? This is the tiny thing sometimes that's the most important thing. Not the big thing, the tiny thing. Again, this is wisdom from thousands and thousands of years ago. This is a comparison of a current global diet in terms of the amount of land that's needed, or a diet with no beef or mutton, or a diet that's no beef, mutton, or dairy, or no red meat, eggs and fish only, or a vegan diet down at the bottom. What happens is 75% of the land, it would reduce the amount of land we needed for agriculture by 75%. And I like it that they put this comparison in here because it sticks in your mind. That would be an area the size of the United States of America and Brazil combined. Right? That's the amount of land that you save. So what would you do with that land? Well, you let it go back. Let it go back. Let it go back into forest land. Let it go back into meadowland. Just reverse it because nature knows what to do. You can't do this up here, right? Barry Commoner, who was one of the great first ecologists, said you can't fool nature. Nature is always right, right? Whenever you just stand back and let nature work, it does its thing, right? You know, and its thing is always productive of life. It's life productive. So when Gary was talking about life this morning, about how animals have a desire to be alive, right? Nature has a desire to be alive. That there is an urge there, an urge toward life, an urge toward cellular organization for exploration and sensitivity. Talk about water, right? All of that stuff goes down into the water. We don't think about water very much, but again, and here we're caught again with our smallness, right? The amount of water that's actually fresh water is 2.5% fresh water on the planet. All the rest of the water is unusable to us, right? You know, it's like the ancient mariner, water everywhere and not a drop to drink, right? And that's true, right? There's a lot of water, but it's not ready to be drunk yet, right? Right? It has to be processed, and it has to be processed in surface water, right? In the atmosphere. A lot of it's tied up in glaciers, right? Or in permafrost. Right? This is one of the most important things in the world. The most important resource that we directly consume is water. And there are places in the world right now that are starting water wars. Nation against nation. In America, state against state, because one state doesn't have enough water, and the other state says, well, wait a minute, the mountains that are melting, the glaciers that are melting, that water originates in our state, but it flows into your state, and you're using it all, right? We want more water. We can't have it because so much of the water is polluted. In this country, I don't have to, media over here talks plenty about the way that your rivers are treated over here, right? Your rivers have become sewers. And Marlene and I are very depressed sometimes because we were walk along the river that was close to us, and we see the kids swimming in the river. And I'm thinking, they're swimming in a sewer. I said, where are the parents here, right? And, you know, these kids are just swimming in a sewer. They're having a good time, right? But who knows what's happening to their health, right? Who knows? You can't swim in a sewer, right? You can't just say, oh yeah, well, we're releasing, it's legal because it rained a lot, right? Well, you know, you're supposed to be able to process that, right? But we're not. We're not processing it. So where's the water going? Because there's water there. Well, guess what? It's our old friends again, right? Look at what the cows eat, right? How much meat, how much water is used for meat, right? Compared with everything else. Now, nuts, I'll talk about nuts for a minute, right? Because they always show up on these plants, people say, aha, right? So are you vegans, you eat nuts, and they drink a lot of water too. And they're absolutely right, right? And so we should know that because almonds, particularly, the state of California grows 80-some% of the almonds in the world. And there were big forest fires recently, right, as you all know. And not even forest fires, brush fires, which is not uncommon, but the frequency of them is uncommon. And so some people were saying, well, it's because they didn't have enough water. And I think the orange one got involved in that conversation too. Trump said that the reason there's more forest fires was because they weren't raking the forest and getting the leaves out. That was his solution. We should hire some people to go in there and rake the forests out, right? Because the leaves are what's causing the problem. No. Right? But anyway, right? The reason that there were shortages in Southern California of water was because the water is bought, and water is a commodity now, and you can buy it. So the water was bought for almond growth. So there was a kind of there's kind of a strange kind of justice happening on here. The people that the houses burned down mostly were very, very wealthy people in the cinema industry, etc. And they're probably the people that drink the most almond milk in the world, right? And so their house burned down because of their obsession with drinking almond milk, right? So when they order their cappuccino, can I go with the almond milk, please, right? Or barista almond cream, right, in it. So we have to be aware that there are certain foods that are not animal foods that also use a lot of resources inappropriately. And so we should just use those with extreme care and be sure that we're ordering or buying from places where there's some sort of sensible farming practices going on. That has to happen. But all of the great water use is bovine meat, sheep, goats, pig meat, chicken meat, eggs. A long way before you get to cereals. You look at vegetables, right? I mean, 322 liters is compared to 15,000 liters with beef. And you can live on the vegetables, right? That's not the problem. You can get the protein from the vegetables. Where do you think the animal gets the protein from, right? They get it from the vegetables, right? In processing that water, it's being processed right now through animals, right? most of the water in the world is being processed through an animal, not through any sort of a cleanup process, but through an animal. And those animals are all producing waste. So it's not only the pesticides and herbicides and all the rest that are used to growing the food, but also the waste. There's an awful lot of bullshit, right? And cow shit too, right? That gets produced, right? From those animals, right? In fact, one journalist pointed out, and I love the way they used it. But you know the Shard in London? That could be filled 75 times with cattle excrement from the UK. You could build 75 shards of animal dung, right? Amazing, right? Way to go, animals, right? Of course, you have that many animals, they have to wee and they have to poo, and there you have it, right? So people talk a lot about the cows and the sheep and the lambs and all the rest. So I want to be an advocate for the fish for a minute, right? Because the ocean is a mysterious world, right? Human beings, the ocean is like, it's exciting. It's nice to put your feet in and go for a swim or something, or get on a boat and travel around in it. But let's face it, it's a mystery. And we don't, when I say we, human beings don't understand much about the ocean. Only the first 7 inches of the ocean have really been explored in a detailed way, right? We don't know what all goes on there. We do know some things though, and that is that fish are sentient. And one of the ways that we can see that most extremely, talk about having a value for life. Ask any angler, and I know there's at least one angler in the room, right? What's the most exciting thing when you're fishing? And the exciting thing for an angler is when the fish takes the bait and it fights. And people say, whoa, this is a fight. Well, why is it fighting? It's fighting because it wants to be alive. That's why. There's no other reason, right? It didn't just say, I think I'll fight. I don't like this fisherman, right? No. It wants to be alive. It wants to live. Fish have memories. Fish talk to each other, right? The ocean is a babble, right? You ever hear when they use high frequency microphones under the ocean, it's just a constant babble that we hear, but it's fish language, right? Fish talking to each other. Right? Nose to nose talking to each other, and sometimes with whales, miles away, hundreds of miles away, even thousands of miles away, talking to each other, singing their songs, right? Do we know anything about what the content of those are? No, we don't really know, right? But it's interesting, right? Fascinating, right? So fish are one of the greatest forms of life on the planet, and we treat them very haphazardly, right? These are the kind of nets that are used in the ocean now. These are enormous nets which are sometimes over a mile long and which sink down into the bottom of the ocean, and they scoop up everything that's there. They're after a particular fish, perhaps, or a particular group of fish. Anything that doesn't fit into that category usually gets ground up to feed to our cats, and ground up to get fed to fish that are being grown in tanks, right? So fish farms are becoming more and more popular all over the world. In China, they're vast fish farms, right, are being grown to supply protein, right? And so the fish that are not wanted to eat directly are ground up and fed to other fish, right? So this is a desecration of the ocean, which is mammoth. There's bycatch too. There's fish that are too big to be ground up. And so they just get thrown back in the ocean. Well, they're dead. They've been stuck in a net for an hour and a half, 2 hours, being pulled up and being damaged in the process. So they get thrown away. Why? Because they don't have any value. They don't have any commercial value. I grew up in a fishing community, and so I have a particular affinity to what goes on there, right? And if you've ever seen we talk about an abattoir. If you ever watch a fish die, you notice what's happening, right? They're being asphyxiated, right? They can't breathe. So that's the fish. It's dying, and people don't know what to do. Oftentimes, those fish aren't even killed. They're just kicked off to the side, right? Kicked off to the side. So it's the same mentality that we're using for land animals, we're using for sea animals as well. And something interesting that's happening there, this is affecting the actual, along with climate, along with general climate change, it's affecting the way the chemistry of the ocean. And the ocean is one of the main drivers of climate in the world. Right? Main drivers. So when you see on the weather report, sometimes you see the tornadoes or hurricanes, etc., are being caused by changes in the ocean's temperature and the content of the ocean. Right. This is a bizarre thing that we're doing, but it's outside of our immediate vision or the way we can relate to it. Right? And one of the things that's always interested me is what, not only in the ocean, but in land itself, is what's called a trophic cascade. And this is one of the things that we're doing now in the ocean, just to spend another minute on this. If the fish that we like to eat the most are the carnivore fish, the carnivorous fish. They're like the salmon and the tuna. These are fish that have fat in them. Because they're carnivores, they have richer blood. So we like to eat those fish. And the fish stocks on many of those fish, wait for it, I'm going to throw a number out, right? Can you imagine how many fish have gone extinct in a short period of time? From 1970 to the present, 90% of the fish stock in carnivorous fish has disappeared. 90%. This is incredible, right? I mean, that's almost unimaginable. But it's very interesting what happens there. The same thing happens on land too when we start messing with nature. If you take an apex predator out of the scene, what happens is the next level of fish down start to overpopulate, and they start to eat the creatures that are underneath them. And you get this ripple effect, right? Moving down, and eventually what happens in the ocean, this happens a lot, is that those creatures that will keep phytoplankton alive disappear. And phytoplankton are interesting because they produce, it varies. People say, some people say a third, some people say a half. I don't know. What do you think, Salish? The amount of oxygen that's produced by the ocean. It's between a third and 50% of the oxygen on the planet doesn't come from forests. It comes from the ocean, right? And so we're killing the ocean through the dead zones, and we're killing the animals that would help to create more oxygen, right? So we're killing it dead, right? And what we don't see this at all, right? We don't see any of it. And this is one of the things that I think is important in understanding our relationship to the environment, is that a lot of times we don't see, because we don't see things, we don't know about them. We're like this. Right? No. I don't want to know about that. No. I don't want to know about that. I'm too busy enjoying the food that I'm eating, so I don't want to know about it. What we buy is what we eat and what we breathe and what we drink. This is the important thing. No matter what it is, in terms of the environment, our purchases are what we take in. Right? That's the effect. Right? I'm going to skip over this because it's wrong. Right? You can look, if you look to how much animal agriculture damages the environment, you'll see lots of numbers, right? It's 14%, it's 11%, it's 10%, it's 15%. It usually depends on what animal rights what animal organization has done the study. Well, our friend Salish here, whose book just came out yesterday, Do you have copies with you?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So you can buy this book, which is fantastic. You can buy Gary's book, which is also fantastic. You're buying my book, which is really fantastic down there, right? So.
And I'm giving my book a
And Marlene's going to give her books away. In other words, they're priceless.
The priceless.
So Salish has really analyzed this from an independent point of view. It seems like 87% of greenhouse gas comes from the animal agriculture, right? And it's all in his book, and it's really worked out. And the thing that I like about Salish's work is that he is unrepentant in his approach, right? This is the way that it is, right? And he's an engineer, so he knows what to do with numbers. And unlike me, right, who was a complete nut. So how many Earths would we need to feed human beings? If we ate the diet that we're eating now, if we ate the UK diet the way we're eating now, the way the UK eats now, you'd need 4 planet Earths by 2050. That's what it would take to feed the planet. So Elon, would be very happy. He's going to be very happy with this number. He's saying, see, if we get to Mars before 85th, can we do it by then, right? Do it by then, and then somehow, and nobody knows how, right? We'll build big buildings there, and we'll grow plants in them, and maybe crickets as well, right? Who knows, right? The solutions to these problems are to look for values rather than expediency, to look for urgency rather than gradualism, and causes rather than symptoms. The urgency part, I just want to mention a word in. The world is on fire. Just because my shoe is not burning doesn't mean the world's not on fire. I don't need to look at it if I don't want to, but it's on fire, right? We're burning everything up. We're using up all the resources of our life. It's our life that's on the table here in front of us. And the thing about that we have a tendency to do as human beings is we always say, well, what if I just do a little? And Gary talked about this, but we'll all talk about it because this is the problem that drives us all crazy. If I just do a little, what if I just only eat meat, avoid meat on Monday? Hey, oh, right. That's like being on the Titanic and saying, is there time for a cocktail? Right? Because I really want a cocktail before it all goes down, right? It's just nuts. We're living in a crazy delusion. Martin Luther King gave a famous speech in the Mall in Washington, and everybody knows this speech, or most people know this speech because I Have a Dream speech. One of the things that he said in that speech, though, was really important, and nobody ever reported it at the time, right? And that was, he warned everybody, he said, this is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism, right? He was talking to the people that were there who were saying, you know what, the civil rights is all great, but if we have a little bit, if people can eat in the cafes, let's not worry about them voting, right? If they can walk down the street without being physically attacked, let's live with that. And he was saying, no, don't go down that road because everybody's going to be comfortable down that road. You want to have a little bit of discomfort, right? And when people talk to us about, oh, well, this is going to be very difficult. I was sitting next to somebody at dinner last night who said, oh, I tried veganism once for a week. It was so difficult. It was like Gary saying, geez, did you think, oh, for Christ, it just means not eating meat, right? Eating the vegetables that you already eat, eating the fruit that you're already eating, and the nuts you already eat, all of those things. That's all. Just don't do it, right? Just don't do it. But be happy with it. It's not torture, because it must be really difficult to do. No, it's not difficult, right? I'm 83 years old, and I feel better now than I did 25 years ago. I can honestly say that.
That would be my cooking, by the way.
Yeah.
You always had to get in there, right? But it's true, right? 25 years ago, and I feel better when I was 24 when they told me I was going to die because I had a perforation in my stomach, right? I feel much better now, right, than I did then. It's not a hardship. It's a real joy. I'll just show you a quick video.
There are so many aspects of the natural environment that we acknowledge are essential, but we're choosing to neglect. One of these is water. Along with the air we breathe, water is essential for human life and health and must be classified as a nutrient.
We want to look at the source of our food, the soil it's grown in, and why it's important for planetary as well as personal health.
Phytonutrients can be found in all plant foods. Every plant has them in abundance. It's essential to give your body excellent daily nutrition to keep your immune system healthy and very strong.
The oceans and the life they contain are a great mystery to us. Our lack of understanding has not stopped us, however, from dramatically changing the very composition of the seas.
Carbohydrates are the most common, sustainable and essential of the major nutrients. It's the fuel that we run on. It's the source of glucose, which when converted to energy, supports most body functions.
Food choices are one of the most powerful ways that individuals can contribute to a healthy planet. We will not be saved by governments or science or technologies.
It seems that we've completely forgotten that simple fact. Food is often seen as something manufactured and not a product of nature. So Bill and I want to shine a little light on what makes sense regarding the human diet and why it's so important right now that we make choices that serve not only our personal health, but the survival of planet Earth. And we're all in this together, so if you can, please join Bill and I in service for a healthy world. Your donation, no matter how small, will go towards creating our educational videos, digital media and community outreach programs.
We need your help in getting the message out. Thank you.
Fantastic.